I used to think the road was just a road. Asphalt, mile markers, gas stations, and forgotten motels. But after what happened last autumn on Highway 47, I don't think that way anymore. Some roads remember. Some roads wait. It was 2:13 a.m. when I got the call. I was still half asleep, coffee going cold in my hand, local radio whispering a weather, warning about thick fog crawling in from the marshlands. The dispatcher's voice trembled as she said, "Sheriff, we got another one. Mile marker 47. My stomach clenched before she even finished. That stretch again. By the time I reached the scene, the fog was so dense, my headlights bounced straight back at me. It wasn't fog like you'd see on a damp morning. It was alive, swirling, crawling across the asphalt, like it had somewhere to go. Patrolman Reese was already there, standing stiff beside an empty sedan pulled halfway off the shoulder. The driver's door hung open. No sign of anyone. "Same as the others?" I asked. "Same damn thing," he muttered. "Engine running, doors open, hazards still blinking. But no driver. No footprints either, not even in the gravel. 3 missing persons in 2 months. All vanished between mile markers 46 and 48. Different cars. Different nights. Always the fog? I ran my flashlight over the interior. A half-drunk coffee, a cell phone left on the seat, GPS frozen mid-route. Nothing out of place, and yet everything wrong. Reese handed me a small item wrapped in a tissue. A keychain with an odd symbol etched into metal. Looked like a triangle inside a circle. "Found it right in the center of the road," he said. "Didn't belong to the driver. The moment I touched it, I swear the fog pulsed. Just once, like it breathed. Reese didn't notice, but I did." I pocketed the keychain, trying to shake the chill running down my back. We called for a tow, filed the report, and waited for daylight. But dawn never really came that morning. The fog just thinned enough to show the tree line, black silhouettes dripping with dew. When I got home, I placed the keychain on my desk, convinced I'd seen that symbol somewhere before. That's when I remembered the old rumors, stories told by truckers decades ago about an accident in '79, a convoy that vanished without a trace. People used to say the fog down there never left after that night. I always thought it was barroom nonsense. Until that week. By Thursday, 2 more drivers reported strange lights following them through the mist. Bright flashes that looked like headlights, except there was no vehicle behind them. Dispatch was flooded with calls. Same description every time. Shapes moving inside the fog, too tall to be human, pacing the roadside as if waiting for something ... or someone. That night, I went back, alone. I parked where we'd found the sedan. The fog rolled in fast, swallowing my cruiser whole. For 5 minutes nothing happened, just silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Then my radio hissed to life. A woman's voice whispered through the static. "Mile 47. Please, help me." The voice wasn't anyone from dispatch. And it wasn't the missing woman either. I recognized her voice from her recorded 911 call. This one sounded older, strained, like someone speaking through water. I froze. "Identify yourself," I said. Static, then faint laughter. Not cruel, just wrong. That's when the keychain in my pocket grew so cold it burned. I pulled it out and saw condensation pour from it, as if it was exhaling fog of its own. The symbol shimmered faintly, like heat mirage in winter air. When I turned, there was a figure standing in the mist 50 feet away, small, still, facing me. I raised my flashlight, but the beam only illuminated empty space. The shape dissolved right before my eyes. And then I heard it, the sound of an engine idling behind me, even though my cruiser was off. I turned back, heart hammering. The driver's seat wasn't empty anymore. The driver's seat wasn't empty anymore, but no one was sitting in it. The headrest pressed inward as if a weight leaned forward to listen, and the rearview mirror angled toward me, though I hadn't touched it. My name fogged across the inside of the glass letter by slow letter. R-O-double. I told myself it was condensation patterns and the shape of my fear, but the radio clicked over to a dead channel and began breathing. Long inhales of static like a tide coming in, and somewhere inside it, a woman counting 2, 13, 2. 13, hitting that number until the fog around the cruiser seemed to pulse to the rhythm like a vein under a thumb. The keychain burned in my palm again, the triangle encircled throwing a tiny ring of clean air in the mist, and a thought tugged at me. An old hobo code symbol looked a little like that. Warnings layered by travelers who had nothing but signs and instinct unsafe. Keep moving. Nothing here for you, except this wasn't chalk on a fence. It was stamped into metal and left in the middle of the highway, as if the road itself had learned to speak in glyphs. I slid into the cruiser and shut the door to make a barrier, but the fog came with me, purled along the dash like sweat, and the clock blinked 2:13, though it had been 2:47 when I parked. The numbers wouldn't change when I smacked the housing, and the radio whispered again with that wet glass voice. He's still in the lane. Sheriff, bring the flares. Followed by laughter that ended in the sound of gravel chewing a tire. Last 2 seconds of a memory stuck on repeat. There was a smear on the passenger window that looked like fingers dragged through dew, pointing toward the median, and as I watched it faded upward, as if the hand had lifted out of air rather than off glass, leaving no prints, no oil, just a warmer patch that cooled fast. I told the recorder on my phone the time and my location, my voice steadier than my gut, and stepped out with the maglite and a road flare, striking it until the red tongue caught and threw a bloody cone across the shoulder, where the asphalt dissolved into cattails and black water. The flare hissed and made the fog recoil like a wounded animal, opening an aisle down the white line. In that corridor stood shapes the eye wants to call human, until they don't move right too straight at the shoulders. Heads a touch narrow, as if stretched by distance that wasn't there, and when the flame cracked, they leaned away together, the way tall grass leans from a truck's bow wave, then settled back, patient. County Sheriff, I said, which had never felt so small, and raised the keychain. The symbol flashed back a heatless glint, and the figures feathered at the edges, a shuffle like paper sliding under a door, and one of them unlatched into nothing with the mildness of a sigh. The aisle led me to the center marks where the paint scabbed up from winter plows. Right there, gouged into the top layer, I found a set of parallel scratches like a rotor had kissed the road, and beside them, this is where my mouth went dry half of an imprint, as if a front bumper had pressed into something softer than asphalt, and left a bruise that never healed. I knelt and put my palm over the mark. Warmth came up through the stone like body heat, not from the flare, and from behind me the radio carried a male voice I knew. Deputy Hank Reese on his first week 2 summers back, young enough to make jokes about ghosts at roll call. Rowan, we've got lights without cars down here. You seeing this? Followed by that same chew of gravel, then a hard cut as if a hand had pressed stop on time. Reese was 10 miles away tonight. I'd spoken to him an hour earlier, heard the clink of his thermos and his yawn, but the board had flagged this stretch for 15 years as a nuisance zone roadside calls with dead air, half messages, mimic noises, things we blamed on the marsh's electrical mood and the big sky that eats radio like a pond eats stones. The flare guttered and spat, and in the red light I saw more of those keychains lying just off the shoulder in the reeds. 4, maybe 5, all with that ring and triangle worn smooth, as if thumbs had worried them for decades, and then tossed them here like pilgrims leaving, tokens at a shrine that never cured anyone. I knew better than to step into the cattails. The marsh keeps what it takes, but the tokens bothered me like a chorus humming under the floorboards, so I hooked the nearest one with the end of the flare. It came up with a ribbon of ribbon grass clinging to it, and when I shook it free, The fog around me thinned in a widening circle until the trees across the median stepped into view, black ribs against a grayer sky. On the far side stood the sign for an exit that doesn't exist anymore, Marsh Hollow. 1 mile green metal on a pole with no road beneath it, half the letters eaten by weather, pointing to a place the county buried under budget cuts and new maps, a ghost ramp with no on-ramp to match. My father used to say some towns die twice, once when the last business closes, and once when the last sign falls. This exit had neither closed nor fallen. It had just slipped like a book put back on the wrong shelf, and everyone pretending the empty space is how it's always been. The counting started again, too. 13, and this time it threaded under my thoughts until I realized it wasn't counting at all, but marking. A time stamp burned into every incident we'd logged here. Calls placed at 2:13 a.m. Dashcams freezing at 2:13. Even the old Polaroid somebody stuck in the break room from that 79. Convoy rumor has 2:13 inked on the white lip in a different pen than the date, as if someone added it later to make the story sit straighter in the mouth. My throat went dry because I did remember the trucker tail-dense fog, missing loads, a slice of highway that never thawed from that night, and I remembered how we laughed it off in the academy, learning to sort myth from menace, but training never covered what to do when myth uses your radio and knows your name. The flare gave one last spit and died, and as darkness folded back in, the aisle of clear air collapsed, and those tall, two still shapes filled the lane again, like teeth closing, leaving me with the tick of cooling metal and the awareness that the keychain in my fist was no longer cold. It was warm, like a hand. I backed toward the cruiser, not running, not turning my back on anything I couldn't name. And when I reached the door, the rear window fogged from the inside, with a new word scrawled slow and careful, just as neat as my name had been. Listen. The radio obeyed before I could, cutting through to a voice that wasn't past replaying itself but present, urgent, hitching breaths wrapped in engine noise, and the squeal of a wiper dragging a dry arc. Mile 47 driver in the lane. He won't move. He's looking at me. Then a grunt, a sick wet pop like pressure, equalizing in a place no ear should hear, followed by that easy laughter, the calm of someone who's already on the other side of whatever happened. I leaned into the dash mic and said the only thing that felt like a line across a river. I hear you. And the fog at the windshield cleared a small porthole, showing me, for exactly one heartbeat, the silhouette of a man standing on the divider ahead, hands at his sides, head tipped as if he were listening to me too. And then he stepped backward into the median and was gone without turning, the way a memory leaves a room. For a long minute, nothing but my breathing and the little click the clock makes when it tries to change and fails, each attempt landing back at 2:13, like a coin that always rolls to tails. I eased the cruiser into gear and crept forward to the spot where the figure had stood, headlights pushing a tunnel that moved with me, and rolled to a stop at the faintest smear in the gravel shoulder. No footprints, no slide marks, just a place where the fog swirled in a tighter knot, like water over a submerged stone. When I opened the door, I caught a smell I hadn't met since boyhood river mornings with my father old iron. Wet leaves and something like ozone after a lightning strike, and under it a thinner scent that made my scalp crawl. A sweet chemical breath like tape adhesive warmed by a projector bulb, the ghost of old recordings. Back in the seat, I set both keychains on the console. Their symbols didn't match exactly, one triangle nested, one broken at the top, both encircled. But looking at them side by side put a thought in my mouth before it made sense in my head. Wayfinding for those who travel without roads. Warnings layered in metals. No one would throw away lightly unless they needed to buy a minute in a place where minutes repeat. I turned the dial through dead bands and landed on a voice reading a traffic report from a decade that didn't belong to any of us anymore. Gas at $2 and change. A harvest parade closure. Rain moving in from the West Clean audio with no station ID. As if the air had found a pocket of itself it had forgotten to spend, and pressed it to my ear like a coin. Marsh Hollow, I said, testing the name aloud, and the fog at the edges of the windshield shivered into tiny rivulets that ran upward, defying gravity for a second before they disappeared into the roofliner like breath being taken back. The urge to follow was a physical ache, a hook behind the breastbone tugging north toward the dead exit sign. Behind that urge came a memory from a file I hadn't touched in years. A missing persons report with no car and a father who kept calling to ask if they bring them back the same. A phrase that made no sense then and makes less sense now that I've heard too many voices in the fog that sound almost like the living. I set the cruiser in park again because there are lines you don't cross alone, even when alone is exactly what the place asks of you, and dialed Reese. His phone rang on my speaker once, twice, and then the answer clicked in with the sound of highway under it that wasn't his older tires. A thinner engine, a tape hiss that raised the hair on my arms, and Hank's voice said, cheerful and sleepy and 2 years young, "Sheriff, you out by 47? Weird night, huh? Hank, where are you right now?" I asked, though the question felt like trying to catch smoke, and the line did that fake static stutter people use to get out of bad conversations, except no one was trying to escape me. Something else was practicing the noise, learning how we end calls when we're afraid. The line went flat, and in the silence that followed a shape flashed in the mirror, a single headlight bobbing in the fog behind me. The soft wobble of an old motorcycle running a little rich. It drew up to my rear bumper and stayed there, idling, unseen but insisting, a patient dog at a door. I put my hand on the dash, palm flat, the way my father used to calm his truck when it rattled, and said aloud to whatever had learned to write on my glass, "If I listen, you have to show," which felt like saying open to a locked jaw, dangerous and necessary at once. The headlight brightened, the fog thinned to lace, and the empty lane ahead filled with the faint glimmer of white paint that didn't belong to any modern crew old lines. Thicker, a little off center leading toward the dark, where the exit used to be. An invitation painted by hands that should have been retired before I was born. I eased forward, following markings no one living had authorization to lay down, and the last thing I saw in the mirror, before the fog closed it, like a book, was my own rear window, clearing one more word in neat strokes, as polite as a note pinned to a coat. Come alone. The old lane markings guided me like a faded artery, thicker paint, and a hand-laid wobble that no county crew has used in decades, tugging me toward the ghost green sign from Marsh Hollow. It still pointed to a road nobody could take anymore, unless the road was taking me first. The single headlight idled behind at a steady distance, not passing, not falling back. A guardian dog made of engine noise and patience. The kind of sonic omen older drivers swear they've met when fog eats the world down to a room the size of your hood. Each breath turned to dew in the cab and drifted upward as if gravity had been quietly renegotiated. And in that small science I felt the rules loosen. A town-sized pocket of air with its own agreements, a sort of off-map bubble where unsent messages accumulate until they become a place you can drive into by mistake. The spur revealed itself as a gentle curve masked by reeds, asphalt quilted with lichens like continent shapes, guardrail missing in respectful gaps as if taken for offerings. And on the post nearest the median, someone had scratched a cluster of travel marks hobo code, near enough little warnings that said move on, not safe, leave quick. The old American script for danger learned by the hungry and the wise. One glyph had a triangle like the keychains, but broken at the top, a seam open for something to pass through, and under it 2 short marks that looked like rails. Not standard, but codes always vary by county and decade, like dialects in chalk and tin. I thumbed the 2 tokens on my console and felt their differences as a message in stereo 1 keeps out. One lets through, and a thought I didn't want formed, and stood there like a man at the end of the bed. These weren't souvenirs. They were tools, and somebody had been issuing them for a long time. The spur narrowed into a bridge with no water under it, just marsh that remembered being a river, cattails standing at attention like a parade for an absent town. And across the span, the fog thinned into a plaza of clearer air, where a gas station skeleton kept its shape without its skin. No pumps, just the islands, paint-baked pale, the ghost of a price board that had lost all numbers, but kept the rust where digits once slotted in. And on the far side, a diner hall with its chrome gone dull as old cutlery in a church basement drawer. The headlight behind me stopped at the bridge as if the span were a state line, idled once more to say stay earnest, then eased backward into blankness. An escort that had done its part and would not argue with local jurisdiction. I parked by the station island and cut the engine. Silence arrived not as an absence, but as a textured thing, a room lined in quilts, the sort of quiet that older folks call good bone quiet and soldiers call the second before it breaks. The cruiser clock still read 2:13, stubborn as a superstition, and when I tapped my watch the seconds hand jerked forward, then back, finding a compromise with a town that refused to move in our units. I told the recorder my name and the location, the hollow, the derelict spur. The station and the radio answered with a public service cadence from nowhere, a man in the soundstage voice of a county bulletin. Citizens are reminded to avoid unnecessary travel during fog events. If travel is essential, pull to the shoulder, extinguish lights, and await assistance, which is the opposite of every safety sheet ever printed, a rule from another administration entirely. Who wrote you? I asked the air, softer than mockery, because there was an authorship in this, a hand that loved broadcasts and knew exactly how to borrow that authority. The analog horror trick where the familiar channel is the mask and the mask is the message. The diner door held on one hinge and made a piano clef curve, and through it the counter faced me, a spine of stools with the red vinyl eaten to gray, and a coffee maker that had welded scale to glass like frost-ground stone, and on the wall a corkboard with cards and notices buckled by damp until the words ran like watercolor hymns. One card, protected under clouded plastic, kept its ink better than the rest. Drive-in service ends at 2 o'clock. After hours assistance, call, and the number had been peeled off perfectly, as clean as a stamp lifted with steam, leaving only the fogged rectangle where help once lived. I turned to the register and found a metal tray that had survived more weather than paper ever could, and under it a handful of tokens, more circles, more triangles, some with the seam at the top, some closed, and a shallow dish of salt, gone to rock with time. A boundary maker in folk logic found in churches, sinks, and doorways. When I picked one token up, the room exhaled. The fog at the threshold rolled back just enough to show the parking lines, and in that gap a set of tire marks appeared in negative, not pressed into dust, but raised from it, as if the car had condensed out of cooler air and the pavement had sweated its shape. The tracks ended 3 feet from the counter and began again 3 feet beyond, a skip over space like a jump cut you only notice on the 10th viewing, the kind of artifact people online argue over in frame-by-frames while laughing to hide their gooseflesh. 2:13, the radio whispered again, but kinder this time, a nurse voice coaxing a child to breathe with the metronome of a machine, and underneath it wheels on gravel, and then a tape-slap sound that studio folks call leader hitting head, the soft clap that says reel engaged, memory loaded. The PA speaker over the counter dead as a doornail, and brown with time crackled to life, and let a woman through. Not the one from last week's case, not anyone I knew, someone older with the warmth people bring to bake sale tables. If anyone can hear me, the boy is still in the lane. And then the clatter of a dropped phone, and that gentle laugh that doesn't belong to relief or fear, but to the moment when the brain gives up and leans sideways. "Tell me your name," I said, a hand on the tarnished mic, as if touch could carry upstream, and the answer came in a rustle of paper and a dryer sheet smell that had no business in a place like this. I've forgotten my name for now, but I was good at directions. I left signs, and the PA died as politely as a librarian closing a book. Out past the islands, the fog lifted to waist height like a stagehand raising a scrim, and a road appeared where no road had been, not asphalt lighter. Almost chalk, and along its edges objects stood at even intervals. Short posts carrying coffee cups, matchbooks, bottle caps, key tags, buttons from coats. A procession of small domestics that meant nothing alone and everything together. A breadcrumb trail built by those who feared bread might mold away. Each cup held a pinch of salt, clotted, each matchbook stamped with a date, not all from the same year, and the line of them drew to the far side of the plaza, where a payphone's frame remained without its phone, the booth like a rib cage with no heart. In the booth, someone had etched a ring with a broken triangle through it, and below, "Listen," which felt less like an instruction now and more like a toll. There's a point where a lawman becomes a pilgrim. The badge still weighs the shirt down, but the heart steps out ahead and kneels at things it doesn't understand, and that happened to me between the second and third cup. A smear tracked through the fog at my shin, as if something knee-high paced the edge of my walk, companionable and cautious. A stray that knew enough to keep one leap out of reach, and when I stopped, it stopped too. And when I breathed in, I caught a clean detergent ghost. Laundry hung in a garage on a winter night. "You left signs," I told the air, and felt a flicker in return gratitude, or direction, or the closing of a distance stretched by years and weather into a string people still pull when they need to summon whatever good remains. At the booth, I set a token on the metal shelf. The circle closed, the triangle opened at the top, a scene for crossing, and the fog on the glass arranged itself into a face shape without features. The kind a child draws when told to draw a person. Round, simple, waiting. The speaker gave a breath, and then a man came through with the embarrassed authority of small-town AM radio, the tone that reads school lunch menus and fireman breakfasts. Marsh Hollow is proud to announce, and the sentence pinched to a squeal of tape stretched too thin. The ruin every analog kid knows from cassettes left on dashboards, where heat turns truth to taffy. Proud to announce what? I asked, and the fog outside the booth lapped at my knees like a tide hunting warm ankles, and the face on the glass tilted the way people do when they listen harder. And now the voice was a whisper with grit in it. Proud to announce the road is new, which is the saddest thing a road can say when it has been forgotten. A scrape behind me took the spine right out of me. I turned to the plaza and saw a car's shape blooming from mist, 1970s box lines, the suggestion of chrome, the ghost of a hood ornament straining forward as if speed were a religion it still practiced. And then it clicked into more particularity. A powder blue Riviera, door ajar, hazards winking without light, just the memory of light. The front bumper bore what my fingers had felt on the highway bruise marks in the world where it had pushed into something that was not. Exactly the air, and the grill held a twist of cattail fluff like a mustache from a serious joke. And when I stepped closer, the driver's seat sighed as if someone had just vacated to stretch their legs. On the passenger seat lay a church program dated the week after the convoy rumor from '79, and on the cover a loaf and fish sketch and the verse about feeding, and at the bottom in fountain pen ink, "After, come by the house, Jay," with a phone number neatly looped and then neatly scraped away. I sat, and the seat fit was too perfect, the way a coat kept in a cedar chest fits the boy you used to be, and the rear view offered me no road behind, only a smear of pale that could have been sky, river, or film leader, the blank that begins every reel. The key in the ignition had no teeth. It was a solid blank carved into the suggestion of a key, and when I turned it, the engine answered with tape hiss and headlight hum, and a father's voice saying it's okay to go slow in fog. "Son, no one's grading you except the ditch," which was not his phrasing. Dad was funnier than that, but the cadence was right. borrowed by a machine that wanted me calm. I turned the radio knob and landed on a farm report from a county I didn't recognize. Wheat proud of itself, hogs uncertain, coffee at the VFW thick as roofing tar and twice as loyal, and the host laughed the way hosts did when neighbors still called in from kitchen phones with spiral cords. The plaza's cups and buttons drew a line to the far curb where a child's sneaker waited. Small white, single, one lace tucked in, the other splayed like a question, and beside it, a triangle encircled token hung on a shoelace, as if awarded for finishing a race. My hand shook as I pocketed the little medal. The metal was warm, not like a hand now, but like a stone that had sat in sun, which the hollow had not seen in years, by the way. Everything grew toward any light my body made. When I straightened, the plaza had filled with figures again, not in the lane this time, but among the posts, and cups standing as if church had just ended, and folks were choosing whether to go home or stand and visit about feed and cousins, and the price of gas that will always be either too much or not enough, depending on the year you miss most. "Rowan," someone said from the diner doorway, a voice that knew the weight of my badge and the way my left knee clicks when cold comes fast. And when I faced it, I saw not a face, not truly, but the arrangement of fog and habit that becomes a person when a town insists on remembering you, to the height of my mother in her teaching shoes, to the angle of my father when listening to a weather report with his head down and hands still. "I hear you," I said, which is not a vow, but is the beginning of one. And the plaza brightened as if 1,000 kitchen lights had been switched on at once, the way a Midwestern town looks from the ridge when supper fires. And the figures didn't come closer, but they didn't go, which is trust if you've ever worked a line of scared people waiting for bad or better news. On the diner corkboard, something had dried in a wave and cracked. The cracks formed letters by accident or intention, and in their little riverbeds, a fog pooled and spelled 3 words I had already obeyed without admitting it. Come alone, which is how all pilgrimages begin, whether or not you bring a convoy behind your ribs. I took out my phone to call Reese and found no bars. Only an old symbol no carrier has used in 15 years. A little ladder of squares that means almost there. Hold on. And the absurdity of that nearly leveled me with tenderness for a world that keeps promising connection, even when the wires are cut. I said his name anyway, into the room like prayer, and the payspeaker ticked and gave me Hank's laugh from 2 summers ago, the one he used when he overpoured powdered creamer and called it snow. And under that laugh a second Hank from now said, "Careful, Sheriff, easy, like a hand near a skittish horse. Stay on your side of the bridge until you see me, Hank," I told both of them, and the plaza accepted the order without echo, as if happy to host only one living mouth at a time. Something changed then, a barometric click. The cups trembled the way saucers do on old tables when a train goes by, and the fog over the highway beyond the hollow plucked itself higher, making a tunnel down lane where the true road waited with its regular lines and its honest shoulder. From within that tunnel came the sound of a car turning slowly, wheels on new gravel, and then a long pause, and then nothing, which is how most disappearances sound if you strip the screaming from the recordings. Approach, hesitation, subtraction. I set the child's token with the others on the console and said the thing that had walked me across more thresholds than policy ever did. "I'll trade," and the fog at the bridge rolled forward like a congregation standing in unison. And somewhere, a tape snapped tight on a reel and began to move, and the clock on my dash tried again to leave 2:13 and almost made it. The clock tried to leave 2:13 and failed, a second's hand ticking forward with the bravery of a town meeting comment, and then slipping back like it remembered whose road this was. And in that small defeat, I understood that time here wasn't broken so much as privately owned. The cups along the chalk road shivered again, each pinch of salt caked into a little stone altar, and the figures neighbor shapes with the patience of church foyers stayed where they were, watchful without menace, expectant without need, like people who've learned to let the weather talk first. The child's sneaker on the curb tugged at me, the metal token on its lace warmer by the minute in my pocket, and behind it the pay booth frame seemed to breathe, glass fogging from the inside, as if an unseen caller had cupped a hand around the receiver that wasn't there, and whispered a name no one had said in years. Law says you don't promise what you can't deliver, but a different law runs in places like this, the barter law, and I felt it move between my ribs, the kind that asks for something personal in trade for passage. So the place knows you're not just shopping sorrow for a story later. I laid 3 tokens on the booth's shelf, the closed triangle, the open seam, and the child's medal. They clicked in a triangle of their own, metal speaking the old traveler language that predates patrol cars and road flares by a century. The speaker caught, stuttered, then smoothed to a morning show voice from 50 years ago. Coffee warm and weather-wise. You're tuned to KMRH, Marsh Hollow's own, where it's always just a hair after 2. And the chuckle died mid-breath, like a man remembering a funeral in the middle of a joke. Tell me about the boy in the lane, I said, hushed in a way that felt like hat in hand, even with no hat on. And the line answered with gravel under tires and the rise of a carburetor starving in fog. Then that gentle, wrong laugh that had become the Hollow's punctuation. He won't move, a woman said from 1,000 kitchens ago. And we were taught you don't nudge a child who is listening hard. And though the words made no sense, the feeling did. The boy was catching something the living couldn't afford to miss. The plaza brightened half a shade, as if porch lights flicked in the ribs of buildings that weren't there anymore. And across from me, the diner's corkboard shed another brittle layer. Letters appeared in the dust grain, like footprints in flour. Stay to the shoulder. I stepped toward the chalk road, past the posts of cups and buttons, and noticed how each object came in pairs, a little out of time. 2 of the same matchbooks with different phone prefixes. 2 bottle caps from the same brand with different logos. 2 buttons from 2 winter coats with the same missing thread color. Echoes that said people come through twice in this place if they're not careful. At the 4th cup, a thin notch scratched into the post matched the open triangle seam on the metal, and when I slipped the metal into it, the fog ahead cleared to hip height, enough to make a lane. The figures didn't follow. They held their little town square positions, like a congregation that knows the procession is for family only, and in that deference I felt protected and frighteningly singled out at once. Halfway down the makeshift lane, the air took on the resonance of tape left near a speaker magnetism bruised into it voices behind the wall. A whole county low talking through my bones. My father's voice came first, clean as the day he taught me to feather the brake on black ice. If it slides, don't fight it. Steer where the slide wants and come back slow. A driving rule and a life rule both. And then the older woman again. Don't shout, he's nearly got it. Followed by a click like a light chain pulled in a cellar. I wanted very badly to believe this was grief arranged as physics, but the physics were too consistent and grief too sloppy for such neat work. Something here had rules and liked them. At the lane's end, the chalk road met a boardwalk that hadn't existed until I looked at it. Planks gray as old prayer books, nails proud of their holes, leading into reeds that stood like a crowd shoulder to shoulder, listening for the first chord of a hymn. The boardwalk dead ended at a low platform over water black enough to feel thick, and on it sat a traffic cone bleached to bone, a stop sign face down like a coin after a bad flip, and a wooden crate of tokens, dozens, each with a different notch. A way station for trades people had made when they thought the right shape would buy the right mercy. One token had a circle with 2 parallel arrows across it, the old warning, get out fast, not welcome. I pocketed it because it felt like carrying a flare in a place where flame insulted the air. Rowan, said a man behind me, and every part of me knew Hank Reese by his weight on the boards. Before I turned, the quarter-inch extra on the right heel, the cautious enthusiasm of a deputy who wants to be brave exactly as much as he wants to go home. He stood at the start of the walk, fog at his knees, radio at his shoulder, hissing with the hush of an untuned choir, eyes wide like first snowfall on night shift, and he lifted his hands slightly the way you do with a skittish dog or a baby you don't want to wake. "You weren't supposed to come past the bridge," I said, and Hank's mouth made an apology before his voice caught up. "I didn't, Sheriff. I stayed until you said my name. Then the fog brought me where you meant, and I believed him because the boards under his boots didn't creak where they should, like the path had set itself to his weight in advance. We stood together like last two at a shut-down fair, both listening to the same thing we couldn't name, and from the water rose a small breath, as of a child surfacing between the dock and a boat. The precise little exhale that says I'm here, and the next inhale that says don't startle me. "He's in the lane," Hank said, as if reading a cue card inside his eyelids. And we both faced the highway's ghost through the reeds, where the chalk road met the real road on the far side, where the fog humped into a low hill the shape of a kneeling person. "We don't nudge a child who's listening," I said without knowing why I believed it. And I remembered the old emergency broadcast pamphlets I'd seen in a box at the courthouse, duck and cover, shelter in place, and understood this hollow had its own pamphlet, and had been broadcasting it long enough to teach even visitors the steps. The crate of tokens rattled, and the open triangle metal hopped on its notch as if a finger had flicked it. And out on the highway the fog hill stood up into the figure of a boy, about 10, narrow-shouldered, hair cowlicked at the crown in the universal way, head tilted as if he had caught a station perfectly, and dared not move until the song ended. Every father part of me wanted to stride out and pick him up, boots and all, and carry him to the shoulder, to safety, to warmth and paperwork and the good tired that comes after fear. But the air around the boy hummed the way air does on a summer fence charged by a mean neighbor, and stepping into it with my living voltage felt like inviting two currents to argue in my chest. "He's listening to the same thing we are," Hank whispered, and for once the kid's guess outran any training I owned. "Trade," I said, the word that had opened the bridge and set the get-out fast token on the cone. The cone toppled into the water without a splash, as if the surface accepted payment and closed a ledger. And down lane the boy blinked slow, like a signal acknowledging receipt. The speaker in the booth behind us kicked with a pop, and a woman sighed in our ears as if relieved no one would make the wrong move. "Shoulder, sweethearts, all the way to the shoulder." And the boy turned not toward us, but along the white line, stepping single file as careful as altar boys on a polished aisle. At the join where chalk met asphalt, the air shook once no sound, just a shiver, and the boy dissolved as gently as breath on a pane, not gone, not erased, but relocated to whatever station he'd been tuning with his bones. Hank made a sound a little like a laugh and a little like a sob, and then clapped a hand over his mouth, embarrassed at having both feelings in public, even if public was just me and a town that used to be. "Okay," I said, the way people say it after a good prayer or a hard bargain, and the figures in the plaza relaxed a fraction, shoulders softening, weight shifting to heels. The universal language of folks who trusted the worst had passed for the minute. The clock in my cruiser ticked forward 1 second to 2:14 and stayed, and the relief that rushed me nearly knocked me stupid, because that single minute felt like a treaty signed in a war I hadn't known how to name. We walked back toward the island stripes and the diner hall, and as we went the boardwalk absorbed itself one plank at a time, not vanishing so much as deciding it had done its job and could be wood again where wood belongs. The pay booth's face on the glass softened to nothing, the way a friend's porch light goes off after you reach your own car door, and the AM voice on the radio read farm prices with the steadiness of a man who had never once been late to supper. "You traded what?" Hank asked, and I opened my mouth and realized I didn't know. The token had names in the old codes. but the hollow had taken something more finely cut minutes from my ledger. Maybe, or a story I would no longer be able to tell without this place's permission. At the diner, the corkboard had rearranged itself with the calm indecency the hollow favored. A map drawn in flour dust, thumb-traced roads, a dot for the station, a dot for the boardwalk, a dot for a place beyond the curve, marked with a simple X and the words nitrogen monoxide car, as tidy as a list on a fridge that has outlived 3 kitchens. Past the island, beyond the plaza, the chalk road resumed and arrowed toward that X through reeds that looked newly combed, and from there a sound drifted back, an engine idling deep in content. Not urgent, not lost, as if it had found a way to idle inside a story where idling never runs out of gas. Hank and I looked at each other with the expression of 2 men who have discovered a door left ajar in the wall that defines their county, and we both said without saying it, "This is where the no-car part lives." "Stay behind me," I told him, which is a thing you say when you mean it, and a thing you say when you're lying to make a kid brave. Here it was both, and he accepted both with the faith of a deputy who has not yet learned how often a sheriff has to pretend. The figures in the square didn't follow, but one raised an arm at the elbow, a small town wave that means see you at the post office if we live that long. And in that gesture, I recognized my mother's way of saying goodbye without worrying the word goodbye, which is how women of her age spared themselves and the world a little grief each day. The chalk road narrowed until it was barely a chalk thought, and the reeds on either side hummed with magnetic patience, and ahead, in the little din of a machine that had elected to wait, lay the part of the case every report had failed to write, where the cars went when they didn't. The sound of the idling engine ahead wasn't hungry or lost. It had the contented rhythm of something preserved in amber, a machine that had elected to wait inside a story where waiting is the whole point. And the closer Hank and I moved, the more the reeds leaned as if listening with us. The chalk road thinned to a suggestion and then to a habit, a path the feet remember when the eyes won't help, and the fog changed grain under my flashlight, from smoke to fleece to the soft pearl of old TV snow, the kind of static you feel across your knuckles more than hear with ears. 2:13, the clock in my head kept time even after the cruiser's hand finally ticked 2:14, and the fact that the hollow had allowed that 1 minute to live felt like a favor we'd have to repay in exact change. We stepped through a last veil of cattail breath and found a clearing that wasn't on any map. Not quite land, not quite lot, a pad of packed shell and dark sand, like the floor of a fill station stolen out of time and hidden behind the reeds, so no one would bother its rules. The idling came from the center of that pad, from an absence shaped like a car. The noise, the warm metal smell, the faint ozone of running electrics, but the space itself was empty. Parking spot pressed with tire ghosts, a bumper height shine in the fog, a driver's side door left ajar exactly where no door waited. Hank swore very gently, not the heavy swear of anger, but the soft syllable men use in churches when a stained glass color hits just right, and held his hand out into the driver's space. His fingers came back warm and oil-scented, as if he'd palmed a working hood. "Don't get in," I said, because whatever sits where a seat should be was already shaping to a body, and the last thing a place like this needs is an invitation it can accept. He nodded too fast and took a step back onto the chalk habit of a line, and the reeds rustled once in approval, like a congregation hearing the right page number. I leaned into the driver's absence, the way you lean into a warm car in January, after a bad call face first, hands braced on the unseen roof, and the rear view that wasn't there gave me a picture anyway. A stretch of Highway 47 clean of fog, daylight sharp as a knife, and a man in a powder blue Riviera smiling toward the glass with a grocery list folded in his shirt pocket. The picture jumped like a tape nick, catching the head, and changed. Same road. Dusk, A different car. A woman's hand on the wheel with a church bulletin on the passenger seat. And after, come by the house, Jay, in fountain, pen, ink, and then another jump, another set of hands, another car. All of them captured mid-errand, mid-favor, mid-regular life. The Hollow wasn't hunting. It was collecting, keeping a museum of departures with the care of a small-town historical society where every teacup has someone's aunt written on masking tape beneath. "What are you buying, Sheriff?" Hank asked, which was both foolish and fair, and I answered without thinking, "Minutes," because that was the currency we'd been trading since the first static counted to 2:13 and back again. I took out the token with the parallel arrows, it out fast, not welcome, and set it at the invisible threshold where a rocker panel would be if anything were visible. The air tightened, the idle deepened half a note, and the fog on the passenger side window did what it does when a child draws on a cold pane. A little face, then letters traced careful as a good student's hand. Here, the AM voice came through the reeds, not from the booth now, but everywhere at once, as if the marsh had hung speakers high in the cattails and wired them to a station that only exists on weather days. Citizens of Marsh Hollow, remain calm. Move to the shoulder. Let the road breathe, and the last phrase did not belong to any manual made by men. The floor of the invisible car warmed under my palm, and an impression lifted in the fog over the seat as if a weight had shifted to face me. I said the thing I'd been dodging since the first night at mile 47. "If I listen, will you let them go?" Something like a nod moved through the pad, a ripple that traveled out into the reeds and back, and the idling eased to a contented purr, the way an animal settles when it understands the game being played doesn't include teeth. In the picture mirror not there, the highway brightened to the exact gray of a cloud-high noon, and a line of cars appeared that didn't belong to any one year. 70s paint, 90s fleets, last decade's rental beige each paused at the same mark on the lane, each driver tilting ahead as if straining to catch a station the living no longer broadcasts. One by one, they eased to the shoulder, Hazard's ghost blinking in the fog, doors opening and closing in a neat, unhurried rhythm. If you didn't know better, you'd say a patient hand was arranging them, as a parent arranges coats on a rack by height. "No car," Hank murmured, looking at the emptiness where an engine knocked, the open hush where a glove box should have rattled, the patient resting place of vehicles the reports had never found, like a ferry slip for machines. "They left on foot?" he asked, because the world requires a method, and I shook my head. Leaving was the wrong tense in a present that didn't pass, and walking was the wrong verb in a place that moved you if you let it. "They listened," I said, and the reeds answered with that small, agreeable hush, and from very close, just over my right shoulder, a child's voice said, "We heard you too." Not scared, not triumphant, just proud the way kids get when grown men finally catch up. I turned slow and found no child, only the dent of small weight on the passenger seat air, the tiny scuff where shoes had tapped an unseen mat, and the gentle smell of winter laundry coming in from the garage on a line. "Shoulder," I said to the dent, and the seat rose by degrees until the pressure eased and the idling smoothed as if someone had taken their foot off a pedal they didn't know they were riding. Out in the mirror that wasn't a mirror, the line of paused cars began to thin, not driving away, exactly, but resolving into something like the way a tune leaves your head after a day of humming, not gone, but no longer a room you're trapped inside. The plaza behind us answered with little domestic noises, cups settling, a booth sighing, a napkin holder clicking like a diner closing after a long rush, and the booth speaker perked with a last bulletin of the hour. "This concludes our fog advisory. Thank you for your patience. Remember, if you must travel, travel together," which felt like the closest this place could get to telling anyone the truth. Hank's radio caught a regular county voice at last weather from now, not then. A truck jackknifed 3 exits west. A reminder about school closings and the burst of the present hit us both like opening a door to daylight after long basement talk. "Sheriff," he said, trying out titles to see which one fit a man who had just bartered with mist. "What happens when it fogs again?" "Then we listen," I said, and pocketed the open triangle medal, because some tools you don't leave on strange counters, and set the parallel arrows token back where it had paid passage, because some debts you let the hollow keep as proof of treaty. The pad cooled under my hands. The idling fell to a heartbeat, then to a memory of a heartbeat, then to a silence that wasn't absent so much as a room gently emptied of guests. The reeds bowed in a gust we didn't feel on our faces. The chalk habit of a road brightened and then scuffed itself back to nothing. And the path we had made with our wanting thinned until it was just marsh again, faithful to its old work. Back at the plaza, the figures of townsfolk dimmed to the persistence of afterimages, and then to the suggestion of a crowd you can't quite prove. The diner corkboard let the flower map fall to dust like a confession that never quite needed to be made in the first place. The pay booth glass cleared of its polite face. The sign to Marsh Hollow shone a little cleaner, as if someone had wiped it with a sleeve, and the AM band slipped into a modern station, hawking mattresses and over-the-counter cures for joints that used to go up steps without thinking. The clock on the cruiser held at 2:14, obstinate in victory, as if to say, "We can move, but we'll do it on our terms now." And I felt a gratitude so sharp it almost cut a laugh out of me. At the bridge, the single headlight waited where we'd left it like a patient old dog. It fell in behind as we rolled toward the real highway, keeping that respectful 6 car lengths a good teacher drills into teen drivers. When my tires touched the state's idea of a road again, the headlight blinked once and collapsed into the fog. Its job done, and I realized, with a pang of homesickness for a town I'd never lived in, that the headlight had never been a machine at all. It was an usher. Reese rubbed his eyes and said, "I'm not going to write this right." And I said, "Write what you can prove, and leave the rest for when your hair goes white." And he laughed because he could imagine it on me and not on himself. We eased up to mile 47 proper, where the modern shoulder welcomed us with the dull honesty of reflective paint and good drainage. The scene crews would find nothing but damp gravel, cat-tail fluff, and the prints of 2 men who had walked into fog and back. In my pocket, the child's medal ticked once against my phone like a fingernail on glass, and the screen lit with a voicemail notification stamped 2:13 a.m. When I played it, the message was only the sound of a wiper dragging across a dry arc, and then the smallest voice saying, "We heard you too," proud as a badge. "Okay," I told the mile marker, the fog, the patient road, and whoever had been tuning us from the other side. "We'll be here next time." And the highway breathed like a big animal sleeping, pleased to have company that knew its manners. The first full minute after 2:13 felt like stepping off a moving train onto a platform that slid with me, a relief so sharp it stung. And then the ordinary sounds arrived in layers, the heater fan coming back to itself, the cruiser's engine clearing its throat, Hank's radio finding the weather from now and not from then. I didn't drive away. People think the impulse is flight, but after a bargain like that, the body wants inventory. Hands, breath, badge, keys, the weight in the pocket that says the trade wasn't a dream and the treaty still holds. The metal on the child's shoelace warmed against my leg with a pulse that didn't match my heart, more like the slow blink of a porch light on a country timer. When I rubbed it between my fingers, the fog at the windshield thinned just enough to show the Marsh Hollow sign one last time, edges clean as if polished by a sleeve. Hank leaned forward to look as though naming it might keep it from slipping. "You gonna log that town?" he asked, a half-joke, because he knew as well as I did that some entries don't belong in any system that prints out on county letterhead. We rolled. The shoulder felt true under the tires, the reflectors winking a decent, modest welcome. A crow on the mile marker shook itself, launched, and disappeared into a sky that For the first time in hours, remembered it had a sun somewhere above it. Traffic was a rumor, not a presence. The highway had that cleaned plate quiet you sometimes get after a heavy storm passes, and everyone stays home to listen to drips. "We should call the families," Hank said, then flinched at his own sentence, because what do you say? We heard your people listening back. "Start with welfare checks," I said. "Keep it simple. We weren't going to announce miracles or mysteries. We were going to ask if anyone got home late and didn't know why, if anyone woke with damp cuffs and the taste of iron in their mouth, if anyone had a voicemail stamped 213 that was only the sound of a dry wiper across glass." Dispatch came in clean. Paula's voice was her regular morning voice, tired but hinged right, and she told us a farmer 3 exits west had reported odd lights in low fog, like a line of cars without cars, then laughed it off herself. Farmers dressed their fear in jokes, the way they dress wounds in duct tape first. I told her to log it anyway and to put a quiet note on the sheet. Watch for timestamps at 2:13. She didn't ask why. Paula has the gift you want in the chair, curiosity, with a safety on it. We took the long loop back to the station, the slow way that lets a mind catch up to its own body. Halfway there, my phone buzzed, the old, dumb buzz that belongs to years when people still set their notifications to default. A text from an unlisted number, green bubbles, as plain as an onion skin letter. "Thank you. Shoulder." No name, no punctuation at the end. The kind of message you screenshot, then decide you won't, then end up memorizing out of caution or reverence. You can't decide which. At the office, the morning felt wrong in a way only I noticed, not bad relieved. The coffee machine sounded less like a dying aquarium and more like water landing where it belongs. A wall clock had been jamming at 13 off and on for weeks. It ticked straight past now, indifferent to our superstitions, satisfied with its little job. On my desk, the first token, the one we'd found on the asphalt the night of the empty sedan, had turned from freezer-burn cold to ordinary metal. It wasn't humming anymore. It wasn't breathing. It was a coin in a jar. I logged the scene with a discipline that felt like prayer. Report title: Highway 47 Fog Advisory Observations and Safety Protocol. No mention of Marsh Hollow. No mention of figures in fog. Just steps. If fog density restricts visibility to less than 20 feet and radios adopt persistent static with voice bleed, move patrol units to shoulder, lights off, windows down, listen for non-dispatch advisories. Keep lanes clear. Don't approach individuals stationary in active lanes unless they initiate movement or request assistance. It read like superstition and common sense had finally shaken hands. By 10, the phone at records started its little festival. Not a flood, never a flood. A trickle, spaced the way the cups had been spaced on that chalk road. A man asking if daytime fog can make a person lose track of a half hour. A woman asking if there had been a detour at mile 47 because she could swear she took an exit that doesn't exist. An older lady, slow and careful, asking if we'd found a bundle of tokens in a tin labeled salt because her husband's workbench had one until last year and she'd been cross with him for keeping junk. And now she wondered if junk wasn't the wrong word. Around lunch, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside, a church program from 1979, the same loaf and fish sketch, the same neat hand with, "After, come by the house, Jay," except this time the phone number was still there. I dialed with the particular dread that belongs to calling the past. A click, a hiss, a ring that sounded like a ring should, not like a memory. Then a voice, male, older, careful. Meyer residence. I nearly hung up, not from fear, but from the sudden feeling that I was calling across a table at a wake. "I asked for Jay," the man said. "You missed her by 40 years, then added, kindly, "You're not the first to call. We spoke for 6 minutes and a half, The things we said were about weather and gardening, because that's how you protect something that could shatter under direct handling. He told me, in the tone we use for fixing screen doors, that the road had been odd that fall, that folks took the long way without meaning to, and that his wife had taken to setting a cup of salt on the porch rail whenever the marsh fog came rolling, because she believed in giving the road something to hold on to. I wrote none of that down, and remember all in it. Hank drifted in and out of my doorway, not like a kid avoiding homework, but like someone wearing new boots and checking each step. He had a pad with 2 columns. What we can say, what we can't say. Under can, stay to the shoulder. Don't crowd the lane. Windows down. Under can't, the road will speak. We both stared at that last line a long time. He finally drew a box around it. A private joke, a little blasphemy. By mid-afternoon, the fog had burned off the marshes. The highway took on that bone-dry late-day glare that makes windshields into mirrors. I should have gone home. Instead, I took a thermos and drove back to 47 and parked on the proper shoulder like the world had taught me. Windows down, engine off, keys on my thigh where I could feel their teeth. No radio, just the big animal breath of distance and the click-cool of metal as it settled from sun to shade. Nothing moved for a good 10 minutes. Peaceful nothing. Bird trill, bug saw, a distant semi hauling grain. I watched the mile marker. I watched my own breath fog and vanish on glass that didn't need it. Then, with the politeness that had become the hollow signature, the air in the lane thickened, a fine veil, and then a wall. I didn't get out. I didn't lean in. I listened. The voice that came wasn't a stranger's. It was my father's. Young in a way I never knew him, chesty and sure, the way men sound when their backs don't hurt yet. "Ease off, kiddo," he said, and I saw his hand ghost the dash the way he used to when we'd fishdale a little in spring thaw. The grief that rose had no edges. It flooded, then receded fast, like a wave learning the shape of a beach. "I hear you," I said, and felt foolish and holy at once. Then another voice, a woman I only knew from a photo I keep in a drawer, my mother at 22, laughing through her nose the way she always did when the coffee was too strong. "Shoulder row," she said, using the name only she used, and the lull in the lane breathed and thinned. I didn't chase it. That's the temptation, to go after the sound as if it were a thing with legs instead of a place with rules. I kept my seat. I kept my hands where the tokens had taught them to be. A sedan came through the fog like a film burned back to frames. It hesitated at the white line, hazards pulsing, not light, just memory of light. The driver turned his head a fraction, as if to catch one more word, then eased to a stop on the shoulder 10 yards ahead. When he looked back, he wore the expression of a man who needed instructions for a life skill he'd forgotten he had. I lifted 2 fingers, the calm gesture we use on livestock and frightened kids. He lifted 2 fingers back. We sat like that a minute. Then his car was only a car again. Night settled clean, no fog, just the ordinary dark you can drive through without talking to it. I poured coffee, held the thermos like a hand warmer, and watched for nothing in particular. When I left, a new scratch had joined the others in the paint at the center line parallel, shallow, like a rotor kiss fresh enough to catch my flashlight. I knelt and put my palm flat to the asphalt. Habit now. Warmth, yes, but not the feverish heat of a place hoarding seconds. The good warmth of a road that had worked. At home, I set the 2 tokens on my dresser, then changed my mind and put the child's medal by the front door on the little table where we drop keys and mail. I poured a coffee saucer of salt and set it beside the medal, a ritual that felt both embarrassing and necessary, like saying grace when you live alone. The house breathed. Old pipes, new quiet. I slept for the first time in a week without the radio in my head. The next days made their own kind of sense. We wrote a bulletin that was mostly weather and manners and slid it to the county list without ceremony. Truckers started spreading the shoulder rule on their channels, not because they believed me, but because they believed each other. A church group brought by a flat of little paper cups and a canister of kosher salt for the patrol, tucked between casseroles as if we'd gone through a death. We hadn't, not that week. Once, around 3 a.m, when the town was stitched tight, I woke to the sound of a motorcycle idling outside my window. Not loud, companionable. It blipped twice, like a dog thumping its tail against a couch, then faded. I lay there listening for the absence it left, the way you listen for a baby breathing and only relax when the quiet arrives on schedule. In my chest, something unclenched. On Friday, a postcard found its way to my desk through channels too ordinary to examine. A photograph of a diner that could have been ours if ours had ever been bright chrome. A note on the back in tidy cursive. We keep to the shoulder now. Tell the road thank you. J. I don't collect evidence of faith. This I kept taped inside the door of the locker where I hang my coat. The last thing that week gave me was a small correction. I'd believed the rule was minute bound, 213's leash tightening and loosening the way tides do. But standing at the shoulder with the sunrise pushing pink across the cattails, I felt the truth step closer. It isn't the minute that matters. It's the listening. 213 was only the town's way of getting us quiet at the same time. If we can make a habit of silence without the trick clock, the road will make a habit of mercy. So that's where you'll find me most nights when the forecast says fog. Right side of the white line, engine off, window down, voice low. If you pass and can't see me, don't worry. If you hear a laugh that doesn't quite fit fear or relief, don't be afraid of it. It's the sound of a place remembering how to return what it borrowed. And if your wiper drags dry across the glass and you feel something tug you toward the middle, count to 2, then to 13, then breathe and slide back slow. Someone's listening. The next fog didn't come with drama. It slipped in at supper time, silvering porches and flattening fields until the town looked pressed between pages. By 9, Highway 47 had the hush of a museum corridor after closing long, carpeted, expectant. I parked where the paint remembers our names. Shoulder, windows down, engine off. The metal on the hall table at home had felt wrong there, like a saint in the wrong church. So I brought it back and set it on the dash where it could see the lane. Paula's voice on the radio was steady as a metronome. We kept chatter light, cut non-essentials, left gaps on purpose the way farmers leave gates open when weather turns unpredictable, so the air can move, so the herds don't crowd the fence. Units 2 and 4, report fog density, she said. 20 feet, Hank answered. 18, I said, because tonight felt a degree closer, like the road had leaned in to smell who'd come to keep it company. At 2:11, the AM band twitched without my hand. I didn't touch it. It settled on the same low place where voices carry it like creek water under ice. A woman cleared her throat, rehearsed and shy at the same time. "Attention, Marsh Hollow," she said, and the words landed in my bones like the first step onto familiar porch wood. Shoulder and windows now. We have walkers. The phrase felt new and old at once. We have walkers. Not lost, not gone, walking. Through the fog came a shuffle of weight over paint, the careful sound of people who had remembered their legs. Not a stampede, the opposite. The oddest procession I've ever witnessed. A man's coat first, then the impression of the man inside it. A purse, then the arm it belonged to. Shoes, then feet meeting them on purpose. As if the world were reknitting from the ordinary details up. Each one reached the white line and paused, head tilted listening like altar boys, counting beats to a hymn they want to get right, then stepped to the shoulder and softened. No longer a problem to be solved, just breath and relief. I recognized none of their faces and all of their postures. The universal language of almost home. One woman had the 1979 bulletin folded in the same thirds I had felt under my fingers in the diner. A man carried a grocery list in a pocket, or my father once kept a pocket knife, and I felt the hot sting of the trivial made holy ink. Paper, errands, and swallowed it down, because this is still a highway, and men with badges do not cry on lanes. We didn't touch anyone. We learned that rule the first night. Let them arrive under their own listening. We made space. We made a quiet that had shape and direction to it. Every few minutes the AM voice would check in, soft as a church secretary at a switchboard. You're close. Mind the line. Breathe. Each phrase no more miraculous than the right word said at the right time, which is the smallest miracle and the only kind you can build policy around. One man stopped directly opposite my window. Middle-aged, fair hair, baffled and unafraid. He glanced down at my dash and then upward like we were neighbors passing in opposite yards. 213? He asked, not quite a question, more like a curse he'd learned to pronounce kindly. Not anymore, I said. 214 if we mind our manners. He smiled like a man who's found a dime he dropped earlier, and walked on toward the flare that was not a flare, the warm patch in the fog where the AM voice seemed loudest. Behind him, the road did a strange kindness. It held back its own fog in a shallow bowl, and for a breath I saw the plaza again, as a negative on film, the pump islands, the cup posts, the booth frame-like bones in X-ray. Not to pull me in, not to tempt, just to say, the treaty holds, we're keeping our side. The headlight usher stood at the bridge and didn't cross. It blinked once, twice, the way a barn cat blinks to show it's not spoiling for a fight. Hank slid a note through my window, like we were at a drive-through. His handwriting had the nervous discipline of a man who chose neatness instead of giving in to shake. Count silence. I nodded. We sat with our mouths shut and counted breaths between arrivals, the way fishermen count beats between waves to see if a storm is stacking or easing. The intervals lengthened. Whatever had been cued was clearing. At 2:14 on the dash, the band rose a hair, as if the station had lifted its finger from a record and set it gently in a sleeve. The lane thinned from fleece to mist to air. You could feel the road remember being a road again, relieved to stop being a mouth. Across the marsh, something like wind moved, but it didn't touch the reeds. The movement lived in the water under them, the way an old pond settles after you pull a heavy net free, and everything finds its depth again. We did our small human duties. Ems checked the few who looked faint without fuss or sirens. We offered blankets and then retracted them when people shook their heads like swimmers, declining towels they didn't need. A trucker named Dell, hands like shovels, asked if he could leave a cup of salt somewhere official. My mother did that when the river came close, he said, and I told him there's a little table at my house by the door where such things go, and he nodded like we'd completed a transaction older than paper receipts. By dawn, traffic had the early bird feel of men in caps with thermoses and women with talk radio. A good, ordinary parade. The fog burned off so slow you could see the color return to the world grain by grain. Hank stood on the median looking at the center paint, and then at me. You see the new marks? He asked. I saw them 3 shallow polished arcs where something had pressed where no object sat. Not damage. Wear. The kind of gloss a wedding ring gets if you leave it on washing dishes for 30 years. It's working, he said, meaning our rule. I wanted to say mercy wears paths too, given time. That afternoon, the county meeting was full without being loud. Farmers, truckers, the churchwomen who bring cold salads in Tupperware, with their names taped under like a blessing. We didn't use the words some of us wanted. We didn't print Marsh Hollow on the agenda or on our mouths. We said shoulder and silence and windows down. We passed out cards with 4 lines. If fog is dense and radios hiss with voices, move to the shoulder. Lights off. Windows down. Wait. Listen. Do not enter active lanes to retrieve or guide. Resume when the lane breathes clear. It read like nonsense if you'd never heard the AM voice. It read like common sense if you had. After, a woman in a denim jacket tugged my sleeve. My mother used to keep a tin, she said by way of hello. Metal coins in it, little shapes. I thought they were for craft. Found one last week in a drawer. She opened her palm. A ring with a triangle broken at the top, small as a dime, worn smooth. I don't know if I believe in any of this, Sheriff, she said, half laughing, half not. You don't have to, I said. The road does. She closed her hand and slipped the token into her jacket pocket, like a girl hiding a secret at school. That evening, I drove without reason down the old farm lanes that brayed toward the river, the kind you can drive by habit with one hand on the wheel and one finger counting fence posts. The metal on the dash clicked once against the glass when I passed the turn that would have taken me to my father's last shop. I didn't turn. I kept the rule I now knew applied to grief as much as road. Stay to the shoulder. Let the middle breathe. Just after dark, a voicemail came through from a number that only ever rings at 2:13. The message was 7 seconds of nothing and then a laugh, the same not cruel, not relieved laugh that had scored every night in the hollow. Except this time, at the very end, a voice said, "Good," like a teacher marking in pencil beside a line of work finally done the right way. I saved it and did not play it twice. Some things you let stay, said once. Days began to stack without vanishing. Weather came and went like weather again, not like a door. Paula started bringing a thermos and leaving it on my desk with a note that only ever said, "For the shoulder." Hank kept his 2-column pad, adding to can say and can't say with a seriousness I found tender. Under can't, I saw my mother's wave in the fog. I didn't cross it out. Then a letter arrived with no stamp, just my name. Inside, a photograph developed on paper that smelled lightly of vinegar and basements. A boy on a divider, head tipped, hands at sides. The back read, "We keep to the shoulder." The script had the modest pride of people who bake pies and don't mention the crust. No signature. I put it with the postcard and shut the locker door soft, like tucking a child in. One more lesson came slow, and then all at once. On a clear afternoon, no fog, no radio hiss, a sedan drifted toward the center, as people do when they check a text they shouldn't. Before I could hit the siren, a delivery van in the next lane eased off, made space, flashed hazards just once, a tiny salute. The sedan corrected without ever knowing how close it came. The van rolled on. That's the thing about a town learning a ritual. It starts working in plain weather, too. Near midnight, I walked the white line on foot, boots testing paint the way a man tests a fence post with a palm. The road held. The marsh breathed. In the cattails, frogs started their cheap seats chorus, rowdy and content. At the bridge where the usher likes to wait, a single headlight flared and softened, then went dark. "We'll be here," I said aloud to no one and to everyone, and the lane felt briefly like a pew, under my hand worn smooth, by people settling in to listen. Each a small weight in a long row of small weights that together make a kind of harbor. That's how the week ended. Not with a finding, not with a car hauled from Blackwater, not with a headline. With a habit. With a town agreeing, without being told, to keep the middle clear and the windows down when the world asks for quiet. With a sheriff who finally understood that some unsolved cases are not for solving but for tending. The way you tend a grave, the way you tend a light you didn't light but get to keep. And if you ever find yourself on 47 on a fog night, and your radio breathes like it has a chest, and the clock acts shy of its own minutes, do the small brave thing. Shoulder, lights, windows. Listen. If a laugh comes and you don't know why it helps to hear it, don't worry. Not all mercies announce themselves with sirens. Some arrive like a cup of salt on a porch rail, left by someone who remembers what the road keeps. The last case they handed me before the board started using words like transition wasn't a case at all, not the kind you can staple to a file. A man pulled over at dawn, shook my hand like we'd met at the feed store, and set a tin on my hood. My father kept it, he said. Said the road keeps what it borrows if you don't teach it manners. Inside the tin, tokens, circles and seams. One with a tiny notch that matched the metal on my dash, like a missing tooth to its smile. We live up county now, he added, but when the fog talks, my boys open the windows. They think it's old-fashioned. They do it anyway. That was the week the clock above records stopped at 2:14 for good. I didn't fix it. People liked glancing up and seeing the minute that moved. The county likes a symbol it can point to without saying why, and I like a reminder you can't ignore. On fog nights, Paula started writing 2:14 on the whiteboard in the dispatch room at shift change. No hearts around it. No underlines. Just the number clean, like a cup of water left where a plant will pass for itself. One evening, the radio coughed up a voice, so faint I almost missed the words inside the static. We can hear you farther now. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was an observation, the way a good carpenter points out a level wall. I walked out to the shoulder with my thermos and set it on the white line. Steam carried straight and didn't twist. The marsh felt taller, like a child after a growth spurt, trying on last year's coat and finding the sleeves short by a hand. Word penciled itself through the counties like rain darkening soil. Heap to the shoulder. Don't crowd the lane. Windows down when the road asks. A trucker's wife told a waitress, who told a teacher, who told a bus driver. I learned to listen for the places where rules become customs, where you stop noticing you're obeying, because obedience has turned into courtesy. Even the kids, God bless the kids with their earbuds, and hurry learned to crack a window when fog sat in the ditches like old men, and they laughed less at the laugh that sometimes came back. You can make friends with a sound if it keeps its side of the bargain. Hank grew into his badge the way a farm grows into fence lines you swear were crooked the first month and then look proper forever. He stopped writing "can't say" and started writing "say only to the ones who ask right." When he married, his wife kissed my cheek and tucked a paper cup of salt in my palm at the reception, with a wink like we were swapping state secrets. We were, in the small town way. Our state was fog, and its secret was listening. A winter came light on snow and heavy on mist, the kind that makes headlights little rooms you carry with you. That's when the highway did something new. It borrowed daylight. At 2:13 on a Tuesday that should have been night, the lane went bright as noon from the inside out, just for a breath, long enough for 3 cars to find their manners and keep them. People argued later at the co-op about whether anyone else had seen it. I didn't argue. I put another token on my dash so the tally would match the favor. The only time I felt the treaty strain was a spring storm that brought fog like ripped mattresses across the fields and voices on the AM band, too many at once. A choir without a leader makes a noise that wants to fray. I pulled over, shook the thermos lid open, and spoke the shortest full sentence a man can say and still mean it. "We hear you." The band settled. A chorus found an alto. The lane thinned to room for one thing at a time. Afterwards, there were 3 new scuffs in the paint, glossy as if Knuckles had rubbed them for luck. I carry one regret, and it is soft as regrets go. One night, alone, too late. I parked at the bridge where the headlight waits and walked onto the chalk that sometimes shows when the marsh is generous. The plaza stood like a remade dream, islands and booth, and a diner's tired spine. I went to the corkboard needing a sign and got one, the kind you don't earn or deserve, but receive because a place loves its manners. Flower dust that spelled Plain as receipts, stay home. I did. The minute I turned, the plaza undid itself, shrug by shrug, like a hostess easing out of a room, when the guests have found the thread of their own conversation. When retirement came around the way all weather does, the board gave me a plaque that spelled my name right, and a gift card for a store that sells boots that fit men who've already broken in the good ones. I stood in the cake smell, and the coffee smell, and the smell of paper and toner, and thanked everyone in the language all places understand. Show up, listen, leave room. I took my box of office life to the cruiser one last time, and found the child's medal had slid off the dash into the cup holder, like a coin settling to the quiet. I left it where it had chosen, as if a thing might know where it belonged better than a man who'd spent his living making charts. People ask if the disappearances stopped. That's not the kind of question the road answers with yes or no. What I can say is the fog learned our names, and we learned the fog's. When the marsh lifts its voice, we don't try to talk over it. We put our mouths away and our ears on. The list of the missing stopped growing the way a garden stops getting away from you when you finally lay down mulch. There are still old names we won't cross off, not because we don't hope, but because hope in a ledger looks too much like math. Once, in clean weather, I took the long loop by habit and found a boy on a bicycle at the median, front wheel cocked, his face turned toward the white line like he was catching a message in the heat. I rolled the window down, though I didn't have to. "You okay?" He blinked, came back to himself with that little shake kids do when they leave a game only they were playing. "Yeah," he said. It sounded like a radio underwater. He pedaled off without needing me to explain the world. That was good. If you explain every mercy, you turn it into a lesson, and lessons don't ride as far as stories. I kept my seat at the shoulder on fog nights for a long time after the badge went into a drawer. No lights, windows down. Thermos between my knees like a low stove. Sometimes nothing came but the soft dark of a county minding its chores. Sometimes a laugh surfaced and dimpled the lane. Sometimes a voice read farm prices from a year no one agrees about. Once, a handprint bloomed on the inside of my windshield, small, 5 fingers, no smudge, and faded the way breath fades when a room decides it prefers its own temperature. I reached up without touching and said the only thing that has ever worked between the living and the almost. We're here. The last time I saw the plaza, it wasn't there. I was sure of that. It wasn't there the way a song isn't there, after you finish singing it with people you love. But as I passed the old exit sign that never had a ramp, the road lifted a smell as clean and plain as a dish towel on a line coffee and salt and rain starting, and the AM band clicked over by itself. "Attention, Marsh Hollow," said the voice that has introduced every good thing that ever happened at 213. "Remember, if travel is essential," I finished it with her, speaking to the windshield and the lane and my own bones. "Move to the shoulder. Windows down. Listen." The band popped, pleased like a dog whose trick you finally did in the right order. If there's an ending, it's this. On certain mornings when fog sits thin over the ditches like a sweater you might or might not need, the highway shows 3 glossy arcs in the paint like someone's brushed it with the sleeve of time. They're not damage. They're handling marks. The road gets touched and it remembers. The mile marker stands where it always has, counting in a way that has nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with presence. I don't know where the cars went when they didn't. I don't know what part of the air carries a voice across decades with the softness of a hand on a forehead. I don't know why a laugh that isn't relief or fear can steady a living man's grip on his coffee. I do know what a treaty looks like when it works. A town full of people who keep to the shoulder without needing a sermon, who crack a window when water stands up and asks to speak, who leave a cup of salt on a porch rail because their mother did and because some manners turn out to be maps. If you find yourself on 47 and the world goes white and small and close, don't force your way through like a man pushing into a crowd. There's room. There's always room if you make it. Pull over. Lights off. Windows down. Put your hand flat on the dash like you're calming a nervous horse. If you hear your father when he was young, or your mother using the name only she used, or a church lady you never met reading the right words in the right order, don't chase it. Let it pass. Let the middle breathe. And when the lane clears and the minute moves and the fog decides to be air again, look at your clock. If it says 2:14, smile once for the ones who taught you. Then drive on, ordinary as bread, grateful as water. The case stays open. The road keeps what it keeps. We keep listening.